Hey BookTube, let's talk about the BookTubeathon. I'm Jen and I talk about audiobooks, and I thought I would let you know how the BookTubeathon went at my house. Well, first off, the BookTubeathon is a big readathon that happens, I think it happens twice a year actually. It's hosted by Ariel Bissett. It's a lot of challenges, reading challenges. There are 7, and then there are some video challenges which were a blast to watch. Just so much fun to watch. And in fact, I would strongly suggest that you search YouTube for BookTube Challenge Day, whatever, and watch these video challenges because they are so creative. They're just so good. So let me just go down challenge by challenge and tell you about what I read. Well, I started out with The Beginning of Everything by Robyn Schneider. This is narrated by Dan John Miller. And I'd had this on my iPod for forever, so I thought I would read it. And I started into it and I couldn't do it. I just wasn't in the frame of mind at the time, and the narrator bugged me, and the writing seemed kind of pretentious, and I just couldn't do it. So I ended up DNFing that, even though the whole book is yellow, which was kind of a shame. But instead, I picked up The Museum of Extraordinary Things by Alice Hoffman. This actually, I have the book, the print book, but I listened to the audiobook, which looks like this, which does have yellow on the cover. Well, Elena of Elena Reads Books and I buddy read this. On audio, it is narrated from 3 points of view by Judith Light, Grace Gummer, and Zach Appelman. Well, first of all, the narration was really interesting. It's not what I'm used to. Literary fiction translates on audio differently than any other genre. And by that I mean that the narrators tend to be really famous actors or really famous narrators. And they tend to do their narration more straight line with a subtle distinction in the character voices. And their emotion is very interpretive. If that makes any sense. It's much more their own style of doing it. They're not acting it out. They're reading it with expression, but it's not necessarily acting. Yeah. Anyway, we loved it. Elena and I ate this up, and I would have given it 5 stars, except that Hoffman's pacing tends to be rather slow, which works for the book. I mean, it works for the plot, but in the end, there was a fair amount of action that was happening, and she would intersperse the action with the inner monologue of the characters, and you know, that just didn't translate for me very well. I was on the edge of my seat. Like, the tension was so tight. I'm thinking, what are they going to do? Where are they? Are they going to get out of there? And, you know, all the while she's going on about these philosophical things in these characters' minds, and I'm thinking, will you get to the point? So that was my only problem with the book. Otherwise, I would have given it 5 stars. So a very high 4 stars. And Hoffman is so incredible with her imagery, and I have to read this one little part for you because I think it's so indicative of her expertise and finesse when it comes to this kind of thing. She's talking, well, the character is talking about a rabbi in a cemetery who's there to do funerals. There was sorrow in the seams of his clothes, but he was used to death. It seemed that life was a bolt of cloth to him, and he was there to fold it and set it in a drawer. Love that. That's what this book is full of. Most of Hoffman's books are full of that kind of thing. With this particular book, I started it when I went to sleep thinking, this is a bad idea. I'm going to regret doing this because I'm only going to get a little ways into it, and then I'm going to fall asleep, and then I'm going to wonder. Well, no. I was up till about 5 a.m. and even on into the next day listening to this book. I could not put it down. It was Changing Course by Ali Martinez. This is book 1 of her Wrecked and Ruined series, and it is narrated on audio by Christian Fox and Lucy Rivers. adult romance, and this is the story of Brett, who is married to Sarah. And Sarah is in a car accident and has a head injury, which changes her personality dramatically to the point where she doesn't want to be married to him anymore. She hates him. And he will not divorce her because she needs to be on his health insurance. And, well, he falls in love with someone else. And so it becomes the story of their learning to have this relationship amid this situation with Sarah. So good. So good. Drama, romance, tragedy, heartbreak, love, the whole gamut. It was really well done. I have to say that if you wade through enough of these new adult books, you occasionally will find a real gem, and that's what this is. I loved it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I had not read Ivory and Bone by Julie Eshbaugh. This is narrated on audio by Michael Curran Dorsano, and it is a YA book that is actually classified as YA historical, and that's because it is a story that is set in a prehistoric setting. I was expecting cavemen and more people that were not as refined, whereas this was almost like a YA dystopian dropped into this setting. And even the setting didn't ring true to me because it felt very much like a Native American village, even in the, like mid 1800s. Yeah, it just didn't translate well for me. The narrator was good. I think he did a fair job with this narration. I didn't love it, but I think that I didn't love the book, which is why I wasn't, I'm not raving about the narration. I think he did a good job. The book just didn't work for me. A lot of people love this book, but for me, I was coming from having read Transcendence by Shea Savage, which is a book about a caveman in prehistoric times, and it had what's a completely different kind of book, for one thing. But the people in that book were not they didn't behave like high school teenagers, and these characters in Ivory and Bone I felt like did. So I think that the YA crowd is going to really like this book, but it wasn't for me. The historical setting and the way that the characters behave just didn't jive for me, so I ended up only giving that one 2 stars. Well, I translated that, because I am an audiobook person, to my favorite narrator. And one of my most favorite narrators is MacLeod Andrews. And I had not read book 1 in the In Boonsboro series by Nora Roberts. This is The Next Always. And so I thought I'd pick it up because I really like him. And I thought, if nothing else, I'm going to really enjoy the narration. Well, I had already read book 2 and 3 in this series, and I wasn't overly impressed with them, but it's the whole romance, adult romance idea of life in a small town with a group of people that you get to know. And I was already familiar with the town, the characters. So it ended up being a really enjoyable read. It's all about Beckett, who is one of 3 brothers that is renovating an inn. And he's been in love with Claire since high school, but she moved away and married somebody else and had 3 little boys, and then she was widowed. Her husband was killed in a car accident, and so she's moved back to town and taken over the bookstore. And so it's the story of their romance. Very sweet story, and of course MacLeod Andrews, I really don't even need to go on and on any more than I already have about him because he's fantastic. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Pretty good trick for me, yeah. I am not into classics at all, which would have been an easy choice, but I ended up looking and finding out that C.S. Lewis died the year that I was born, so everything he wrote had to be before that. So I picked up The Horse and His Boy on audio. This is my favorite of the Chronicles of Narnia. It is book 5 if you go in publication order. It was narrated on audio by Alex Jennings, and I didn't think that it was going to be that great. I thought, I'm going to get bored with this because it's a kid's book, and no. Alex Jennings was so good. He grabbed me when I heard him narrating the voice of a prince who is engaged to Susan, she has decided she doesn't want to marry him after all. And Jennings just voices this prince like a spoiled brat, even though he's a man.
"But I want her," cried the prince. "I must have her. I shall die if I do not get her, false, proud, black-hearted daughter of a dog that she is. I cannot sleep, and my food has no savour, and my eyes are darkened because of her beauty. I must have the barbarian queen."
I thought I was going to die laughing. So this ended up being one of the highlights of the week for me, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. So for that, I picked up World War Z by Max Brooks. This on audio is narrated by an entire cast, including Max Brooks, who wrote the book, Alan Alda, John Turturro, Rob Reiner, Mark Hamill, Alfred Molina, Simon Pegg, Henry Rollins, and Martin Scorsese. Boy, talk about a star-studded cast. You know, I got partways into this, probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours into it, and I couldn't quite do it. Boy, it's so bloody and gory, and it's completely different from the movie in that way. I think the movie has its fair share of blood and gore, but to have it described to you in kind of a retrospective, almost like a memoir, because this is sort of a collection of interviews that Max Brooks has fictionally gone and collected from people around the globe and documented their experiences with the war. So it just got it really gory for me, and I thought, yeah, no, I can't do this on audio. I can do it in print because I can skim parts that I don't want to read, but you know, on audio I just couldn't do it. So I didn't really DNF it, but I put it aside for now. Didn't rate it because I didn't finish it, but I plan to in the future. I happened to be sitting on my sofa one day, and I reached over and picked this up off my bookshelf. I have a ton of interior decorating books because that's my profession. That's what I do. I'm an interior designer. This is Kath Kidston's In Print, and all it is a collection of prints, prints that she's done, but also her use of them in everyday materials, and just, you know, the way she's done it, like, you know, patches, wall hangings, tabletops, beads, silky camisoles, and all kinds of things like that. It's a beautiful book. It is one of those cloth bound, so it doesn't have the dust jacket, and it's got these beautiful end papers. It's a pretty book. And it didn't take me very long to get through, and I'm glad I read it, because these are the kinds of books that I buy and then I put on my shelf, and I flip through them in the store and then I never read them again. So it was good to read. It gave me some ideas and kind of got me inspired. I also read 2 ARCs that I had. These are audio ARCs that I received from Penguin Random House Audio. So thank you to them, a huge thanks to them, because they were a huge pleasure to read. The first of those was Dark Matter. This is by Blake Crouch, and on audio it is narrated by John Lindstrom. This is adult sci-fi, parallel worlds. Oh my gosh, it was so good. It was so good. It was so well narrated. I loved John Lindstrom. He I think, was part of the reason that I thought that the book was so good. This was a 5-star book for me. I was riveted, I was entertained, I was hopeful, I was on the edge of my seat, I was, you know, all over the place with this book. Get it. If you like sci-fi and alternate worlds, get it. This man, he's a professor at a college, and he's an atomic physicist, and he's on his way home when he gets kidnapped, and when he wakes up, he's in a strange place that he doesn't recognize. It's his life, but it's not his life. So really, really interesting story of him trying to get back home again. And oh my gosh, you know, when you figure out how he's gotten kidnapped and you know who kidnapped him, I thought, that's the big reveal? Really? No. Oh my gosh, plot twist after plot twist. It was riveting. I absolutely loved it, and if you can pick it up on audio, you should, because it's completely worth it. And lastly, I listened to The Beauty of Darkness, which is book 3 in the Heart of Betrayal series by Mary E. Pearson. This is a much-awaited sequel and final book in this series, and it was a fitting end. On audio, this is narrated by a cast including Emily Rankin, Ryan Gazelle, Kirby Hayborn, Kim My Guest, and Anne-Marie Lee. The audio was good, I'd say overall. I didn't care for Emily Rankin's whispery voice because there are times in the action that her voice needs to have a lot more power behind it than it does. And Kim My Guest is not a favorite of mine. She has a really high little girl voice, although I have to say in this particular book she was well cast. Anne-Marie Lee introduces the whole thing and kind of acts as the narrator, and she's way overdone. She's like a Shakespearean actor who just way overdoes it. And it just kind of bugged me. But Ryan Gazelle was excellent, and so was Kirby Hayborn, who is always excellent. So they kind of made up for it. This has a bit of a love triangle in it, and so the key characters are Leah and Rafe and Caden. And it's pretty obvious who's going to win the girl, and it's not the guy that I had hoped. But the thing is, I read an interview with Mary E. Pearson about this, and she said that the guy that didn't get the girl, she really felt for him and felt like he needed to have a happy ending, and he gets one. And I was so pleased at that. I thought if he's not the guy, then, but he gets his ending. The ending is, I think it's going to disappoint some people, but really, I was very happy with it. I think it is very fitting. You know me, I'm a hopeless romantic. I want Cinderella and Prince Charming in the carriage, heading off into the sunset, happily ever after. And I feel like this is a happily ever after. So don't be afraid that it's going to disappoint you. I don't think it will. It's not the traditional happily ever after. So I just thought it was great. She tied up all the loose ends very nicely. And for this fantasy series, I think that it was just very well done. There you have it. I had a really good experience with this BookTubeathon. So let me know how you did on the BookTubeathon. If you feel like you met your challenges or you didn't, or if you didn't do the BookTubeathon, are you planning on it in the future? What do you think? Are these kinds of things not for you, or do you even care? Let me know. Let's talk about all that in comments. Also, if you've read any of the books I read and you had an opinion on them, of course I always want to hear those. So let's talk about all that in comments, and that is it for now from me. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.